Welcome to the Wits School of Governance, to our series of public lectures by distinguished speakers. Today we have a very distinguished speaker, Ms. Bogolo Kenewendo, who is the former Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry in Botswana. She's currently a member of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation, as well as participating in the group on financing for development. She is also a member of the World Economic Forum, WEF, Global Futures Council for Global Public Goods on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. She's also one of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders. She runs her own firm, Kenewendo Advisory. She, at the time when she was Minister of Industry, Investment and Trade in Botswana, she was also pivotal in leading the negotiations on the continuity trade agreement with the United Kingdom, which gave greater certainty to both consumers and exporters. And this agreement was between the SACU countries plus Mozambique and the United Kingdom against the backdrop of Brexit. She holds an MSc in International Economics from Sussex, and she has passion for businesses in the African continent. And the theme that she will be sharing with us is rebuilding African economies during and after COVID-19. There have been a lot of questions about the state of the continent during the COVID pandemic, and whether we will have the resilience to come out of this pandemic unscathed. Some have reflected on the earlier periods in the 1980s and in the 1990s, when many African countries faced a severe sovereign debt crisis. So we really want to gain insights from Ms. Kenewendo on some of the strategies to take African economies out of the crisis mode, the business opportunities that exist in the African continent, especially for women entrepreneurs, as well as broader lessons on leading change in times of turbulence. All of these themes, they reflect our own interests as Wits School of Governance, a school that interfaces with public servants, with public sector leaders, and produces or develop programs in governance, public policy, and development management. So we look forward to doing more events such as these. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to former Minister Ms. Bogolo Kenewendo to give her public lecture, followed by questions and discussions via the chat function. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I want to thank you for having invited me, and for everyone else that is joining us this evening. Thank you so much for the honor of your time. It is very strange for me to be giving this public lecture virtually, and there is no one on screen. So if you see me also zoning out, it means I am missing you. I am used to connecting with the people that I talk to and understanding what their backgrounds are. And so really COVID has certainly changed the way that we do business and the way that we interact. But given all of that, I again was not sure about the audience that will be joining us today, to understand what their backgrounds are, how deep can I go into the background of the Afcfta, and just how much of that little bit of technical side to people understand. So bear with me if I go a little bit on a tangent to talk about some of the technical things, and then I will make sure I come back and wrap it up with the opportunities as has been discussed and so forth. So as I start, I want to remind all of us, especially the scholars of Pan-Africanism, that Nkrumah in 1963, he delivered a speech on African unity. And it is quite famously, he cited that we must unite or sink. I remember very well, and as I was preparing for this, there was one part of the speech that really caught my attention, and I wanted to reiterate it to you, that he said, we all want a united Africa, not only in our concept of what unity can connect, but united in our common desire to move forward together and dealing with all the problems that can be best solved only on a continental basis. And while this aspiration, this political idea, aspiration for political and economic unification in Africa goes back to our post-colonial days, it then just kind of died out following the coup in Ghana and the oust of Kwame Nkrumah. But it was then resuscitated, it picked up steam when we had the first institutional commitment to economic integration in the June 1991 Abuja Treaty, which established the Africa Economic Community. Again, I wasn't sure of the background and how much I should give, so I just decided to go as far back as I could, just so I can show just how monumental where we are today is, and how these dreams come from far back, and it is all about that long game, especially when you have the vision for what you want. So the project, once again, following 1991 for about 2 decades, lost momentum. And it was because of all the instabilities that occurred, the death of political will around implementation of reforms that were necessary in order for us to really start talking about economic and political union. And in a sharp departure from those 2 years after Abuja Treaty, African leaders went so quickly to sign in the Afcfta in 2018, to entry into force in 2019, operationalization in 2020, and of course the trading year in 2021. As you can see, it then following that inertia of about 20 years, there's been a record speed that has happened in really pushing for the implementation of our intra-African trade unification. And this has been one of the most celebrated achievements of the African Union. And now the Afcfta in operationalization will become the largest free trade area in the world since the establishment of the WTO. I again think this is very momentous. It's a big deal, it's monumental. And why this is monumental is not only that African states and African heads of government have signed up to trading together, have signed this piece of document to say we want to increase intra-African trade. No, it is monumental because we recognize, there's a very broad recognition that regional integration will play a very key component for economic progress and for poverty reduction. And there are compelling reasons to drive this project forward, to take advantage of these opportunities provided by the new normal, and to forestall a return to inertia of the previous 2 decades. So there's a lot of arguments of why we should be doing this, but of why we should be doing this right now in particular. So all these issues around COVID, an added impetus to why we really should be talking about intra-African trade. And I will touch a little bit on that a little later on. So in short, if there was really ever a time for us to talk about and to work on economically integrated Africa, it certainly is now. So fundamentally, the Afcfta will put African economies and African citizens, African entrepreneurs and investors alike on a better economic footing. The agreement will enhance competitiveness and stimulate investment, innovation, economic growth by increasing efficiency and eliminating barriers to trade. The key issue here is that we want to eliminate all barriers to trade, and there will be a ripple effect in doing so. And in fact, it will eliminate, it has been agreed that it will eliminate on tariffs on 90% of goods and incrementally apply the same to services at a time, and I want to note this, it will apply incrementally to services at a time when other regions across the world are becoming more inward and they are really rethinking trade agreements and economic integration. I mean, we're yet to see if the tone in the world will change now with the Biden administration. But in the past couple of weeks, I mean, the President Biden himself has really been talking about buy USA products. So we will see if there is an additional echo to multilateralism going forward. So that is something that we will be keeping an ear out for. So the removal on tariffs, of tariffs on goods in particular, is projected to increase the value of intra-Africa trade by 15 to 25% by 2040. This will translate to approximately $50 to $70 billion in value. And the Afcfta, as most people know, will cover a market of more than 1.2 billion people in 54 countries and up to 3 trillion in combined GDP. And meanwhile, the World Bank has also come out with other figures to say that the agreement could add an additional 76 billion in income to the rest of the world. So again, this is not only an agreement that will work for the continent, but it is one that we anticipate will boost international global trade and add revenue to income really to the rest of the world. I was fortunate to be a part of some of the negotiations during for the Afcfta, and I can tell you definitively that this was not an easy process, and getting here was certainly not as smooth as it comes out, you know, in press statements. And I watched on December 21st, I think it was, December 5th, as President Ramaphosa was talking about the trading of Afcfta in January 2021, and in the elation, in the mood, I thought, you know, if only the negotiations were as simple as it is coming out in these press statements. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of insights into what went into these negotiations. Again, if you already know, bear with me. I just saw a lot of interaction of young people on Twitter and Facebook, and so I just thought I'd give them a little bit of a background. So again, the negotiations were very intense. They were and they were extensive. And many governments were worried, of course, as with many lobbyists who warned that free trade may open a floodgate for cheap imports that can destroy already ailing economies or very infant and nascent industries that exist in some of our countries. So this was one of the primary concerns, and it led to a lot of engagements, particularly around issues of rules of engagement, rules of origin, just to ensure that someone doesn't get a product from a third-party country, slap on a button and then say it's a made in Africa product, and it having access to this common market. So there really had to be a lot of work to be hashed out around what really constitutes as an made in Africa, made in Botswana, made in Eswatini, and so forth kind of product. And in addition to that, there were also issues around exchanging tariff concessions, and it was eventually agreed that there would be 90% tariff liberalization, but there were also a lot of issues around sensitive products. What are sensitive products? How far can we take sensitive products? How long should we take to liberalize around the sensitive products? And these are the ones that most countries hold dear and consider them to be industries that are so key to their economies that they cannot liberalize in those spaces. So there was an agreement about the gradual liberalization eventually into those products. Now, following all of those negotiations, the agreement entered into force 30th May 2019 for the 24 countries that had already submitted, deposited their instruments of ratification. And soon after that, then the next step was the operational phase of the Afcfta, which was launched on the 7th of July 2019. And some key instruments that were launched then included the rules of origin, the tariff concessions that I just talked about, the online mechanisms on monitoring, the Pan-African payment and settlement systems, the African Trade Observatory. Now, all of these were done then and were launched then. And as of 15th January 2021, 35 countries have deposited their instruments of ratification, and the start of trading under the Afcfta agreement began on the 1st of January 2021, in line with the decision and declaration that was adopted during the 13th extraordinary session of the Assembly of the Union on December 5th, 2020. I think that is enough with the background. I see some chats are coming in. Please keep them coming and keep me company. I feel like I'm out in the wilderness by myself. So if you just let me know that you're there, I would appreciate it. So as I was saying, enough with the technical issues, I want us to really talk about that the start of trading was slowed down by COVID-19. The onset of COVID-19 really shook a lot of countries. It even shook us in the continent, and you know, everyone was really focusing more on what needed to be done to deal with this unknown pandemic, to deal with the ensuing economic crises. So there was a little bit of a delay in trading as well. But now that we understand this disease better, I see that, and I know that there are all these variants now that are messing up our understanding of COVID-19, but we at least have some sort of understanding than we did at this time last year in 2020. So now that we have that bit of understanding of the disease and the economic crisis that it has caused, it is important that we recalibrate the way that we think about the Afcfta, intra-African trade, and our choices and decisions moving forward to reflect this new reality. So because it is clear now that more than ever, it's important for Africa to fast track the idea of an economically integrated continent. And I say so because when COVID hit, most countries started to really implement those pro-protectionist policies that, you know, they didn't allow exports of PPE products. And we are seeing that now with the introduction of the vaccine. We've seen it in the EU when they're saying, okay, all vaccines that are made in the EU should be provided to the EU first before they are exported. And this, for me, continues to be a market distorter to show that multilateralism only works when, it suits and not all the time. So it's important for Africa to trade with itself, to work quite faster to ensuring that the Afcfta is implemented and that we are able to trade with each other, so that as the world looks away, we are able to provide for ourselves and we are able to use our raw materials to produce goods that will benefit us. I mean, that even brings us to the issue of the vaccine. I've been very vocal about the vaccine and how even the Africa CDC, Africa practitioner scientists should be involved even in research around the vaccine and generating one in the continent. I am sure with the vast knowledge that we have, something could be done. But again, I will talk about this a little later on. So I believe that indeed these restrictions that have been imposed by the pandemic present an opportunity not only for the Afcfta and the member states, but for the Secretariat itself to implement its mission and achieve significant economic benefits during a period of turmoil and change. As you know, they say the best things happen when there is turmoil and when there is change. And as Madame Ngozi usually says, we cannot waste a crisis, and we have to make the most out of it by adapting, because you can find that sometimes it is that extra wind that was needed to push us forward. And the opportunities in the Afcfta are many. There are many for young people, there are many for women, for SMEs, for big businesses, for development partners, everyone alike. And many of these opportunities are due to the fact that we're going to have to start somewhat from scratch, rebuilding some of the systems from scratch. Because you'll remember that we are talking about intra-African trade now and it being subdued over a period of time, now only resting at about 12 to 15%. And that is because our trading infrastructure has mainly been outward looking. It has been to encourage trade with the rest of the world instead of trade with the continent. So we're going to need to start working on the infrastructure that allows us to do that. And infrastructure, I'm not only talking about the physical infrastructure, which is good, but I'm also talking about institutional infrastructure, including financial infrastructure that is needed for us to see the Afcfta through. So the COVID-19 has already been an accelerant of existing trends, including increased digitization, digitalization of economic activity. I remember when we started work with the high-level panel on digital cooperation, a few African legislators would talk about that topic, but right now it's in everyone's tongues, and it just shows just how a crisis can push you to do a little bit more than you thought you were able to do, and can just give you that extra sense of urgency. So the trend could benefit us, that trend could benefit us as the continent because we lack the sunk cost and the consequent resistance to change of legacy infrastructure and systems. So because we already don't have the sunk cost of saying, well, we had already invested in this infrastructure, we can't change. We have so much infrastructure that we can still build. So this really gives us an opportunity to just direct our investments in a way that will benefit not only individual economies, but the unification of our trade as a bloc. So by riding the momentum that has been given to us and gently nudging member states to make this trend permanent, the Afcfta can certainly speed up integration. And the Afcfta can ride this wave of an accelerated push towards a digital economy and drive the trend towards permanence in member states. And I was happy. One of the things, we just had a budget speech given a couple of days ago, I think 2 days. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the continuous mention of digitizing government services. And that is something that we have been pushing for the longest time. And I'm hoping that we will now certainly see its implementation, because we do not have a choice. And it is when we do not have a choice that reform and the reform agenda also do not have a choice. Reform agenda. So throughout this pandemic, there has been a crazy spike in online transactions across Africa. And I know when we talk about that, people, well, there is no infrastructure for digital online platforms, but we have seen it. And I want to give an example of Jumia, for example, which is called Africa's Amazon. It has seen a fourfold increase year over year, with the African orders tripling. That is Jumia. And the digital economy, because we know that the digital economy is here to stay, and a continent without legacy infrastructure, as I was saying, could benefit the most from really investing in that space, from boosting and stimulating investment in that space, and ensuring that we benefit from it, as we did with the expansion and diffusion of mobile phone technology. We have that infrastructure of mobile phone technology in place. And when we talk about digital, the digital economy, it's not only about online, it's also about those offline solutions that can be used, that are reliant on USSD and other platforms to ensure that we reach even those that do not have access to and internet. So the first opportunity, I can just say, is very clearly in the digital economy, digital education, digital health, digital trade, e-commerce, just to mention a few. This is certainly a space that we need to ensure we are focusing on, and that the interest that we have on it now sticks. So from generating investment in African tech firms to rationalizing patchwork regulatory systems, there are immense gains to unified approach on a digital economy. And I was giving a talk again a couple of days ago to a group of investors, and I said, you know, it is high time continent, particularly on African tech, that we invest on African tech, on technology that is developed by Africans, and not only say that we are going to be investing on technology in Africa, but only turns out that it is its IP rests outside of the continent, and its back office rests out of the continent. We want that money to be here. I have seen so many cases as minister and before, where young people are developing an almost identical product, an American and an African, and an American gets the investment over the African because of, granted, because of the understanding of the market better, but also just because they are in tune with the American market. So if the American investors, European investors, African investors want to invest in African in technology that serves Africa, they must, and I encourage that they look at first technology that is created by Africans. And it is estimated that investment in African tech companies in 2019 was around 1.3 to 2.5 billion. Again, I have questioned where these African tech companies were, if they originated in the continent or if they from elsewhere. I am not discouraging people to come to the continent and set up here. I'm just saying we should provide equal opportunities to those developers even in the continent. So one of these companies are platform-based applications, which, like Twitter, do not really require do not require a lot of physical infrastructure, and the ability to provide their services seamlessly across borders without negotiating a patchwork of regulatory regimes will be an excellent place for us to begin. So this is really a conversation to be had with the regulatory authorities authorities to ensure that as digital trade booms in the continent, that the right regulations have been put in place that are stimulatory and accommodative. And beyond just talking about digital economy in Africa, COVID-19 has also presented an opportunity for Africa to reposition itself, particularly in the oncoming restructuring of global value chains. Some argue that this started with Trump, the US-China trade war. But when you look at it from a scholarly perspective, you get to see that that moving away from China is not really something that is new. There were a lot of tariffs that were slapped on China during the Obama administration and the ones before. So it would be interesting to see how that changes. But while that conversation is still ongoing, I see an opportunity for African entrepreneurs, African investors to slide in there, and find their place in the global value chains. So governments, as I said, across the world are expressing doubt in globalization, contemplating economic decoupling and a pivot away from this China-centric global economy. So this trend of moving away from a China-centric global economy will really give an opportunity to us in the continent to play a role in these global value chains, because Africa's absence from great power competition and our refusal to choose our partner of choice really places us right at a location where we can choose our role in value chains in the auto sector, in pharma, in high tech, and in many other manufacturing spaces. And I was saying this is particularly important for countries like Botswana that are landlocked and that are small, that have been told before that they do not necessarily have a place, a comparative advantage in global trade because they're small and landlocked, but the global value chain and the scale and how things are being broken down really gives an opportunity for countries like Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Rwanda, and so forth to play a role in global trade. So most, at this point, just to look for more opportunities, I would encourage you to visit your ministries and find out how your countries are positioning themselves and entrepreneurs to play in the Afcfta, because at this point, most countries and customs unions have already submitted their offers and they know the products that they are willing to, the products and industries that they are willing to trade in. So I mentioned all of the above big investment projects because I refuse to believe that conversations around opportunities for young people and for women should always micro, that we should talk about microfinance, microcredit, micro industries, but we should, when we address young people and women about the opportunities that exist, also show the bigger spectrum of industries, of projects and opportunities that are available, and also redirect capital conversations to do the same so that we can have an equitable participation of women, young people, men alike in the economy, and particularly in the Afcfta. We have been left behind in modern markets already, and we wish not to be left behind with the onset of the Afcfta. So that said, I would like to focus a little bit more in particular on the inclusion of our indigenous economies, knowledge, indigenous knowledge and indigenous products in the because I know every time I talk about indigenous economies, there is always cynicism around indigenous economies. And this is because many believe this is because many just think that there is no place for indigenous economies in the modern economics. I have heard, whenever we've had debates, I have heard arguments that modern markets will always overtake informal sector, indigenous economies, and they will provide benefit for all. And I always revert by saying, well, tell that to the over 85 are still in the informal Africa, centuries after globalization and centuries after capitalism. So I think what we are seeing here is that the destruction of our indigenous economies has not led people to be facilitated into modern market, but instead to remain on the waysides of the economy and to, participate, to be in our informal sector, to not be full participants of the economy, and to not realize the full value that could be generated in our economies. And I believe that this conversation in indigenous products, indigenous knowledge, and indigenous economies is one that we should be having, because it is in the sector that I believe that there will be growth, large growth of SMEs, and in particular women, because they are the holders and curators of such information. So this is, I believe that this is really where we will see it, or the main focus for this area will be the phase 2 negotiations of the agreement, and it holds a lot of opportunities, particularly in the intellectual property space. So phase 2 of the Afcfta negotiations should not be delayed either. We have said this before, but instead this protocol of investment and associated protocols, phase 2 items should really be accelerated. The protocol on IP should leverage on existing regional IP regimes such as the ARIPO, and we want to see us tapping into African knowledge that we know, African knowledge and practices that we know are so unique and have been able over generations to provide the discovery or result in the discovery of medicines and other innovative solutions. And what it needs is a flow of capital and a flow of technological transfer to ensure that that IP is modernized and it is able to be traded. Now, once we really defensively protect our IP as Africans, then we can ensure that we are able to trade it outside of the continent without it being claimed by other people and us eventually seeing our products being mass produced elsewhere and us losing opportunity and value in them. So the protocol should provide minimum requirements for the protection of traditional knowledge, genetic resources, and cultural expressions. And the traditional knowledge passed from generation to generation, as I have said, and I said this earlier, where is our African vaccine? Have we tried out our indigenous knowledge, our indigenous products, modernized it in such a way that we would be able to trade it across not only the continent, but the world? And it is very imperative that we look at African IP and we protect it, because this will empower the communities to promote their traditional knowledge and to control their uses, to control how they are traded, and to gain benefit from its commercialization exploit. So as I conclude, I was given 30 minutes and I think I've gone over that. So as I conclude, while I'm very optimistic about the Afcfta and I'm a big supporter of the project, I'd like to encourage everyone to approach this trading phase with cautious optimism. And I say cautious optimism because we have to realize that things won't work 100% from the get-go, that there will be hiccups and there will be challenges. But what is key is that we see countries and governments continue to submit how they will handle and facilitate intra-African consignments, how they will remain committed not only to tariff liberalization, but also to non-tariff barriers liberalization, and how they aspire to truly facilitate intra-African trade, including and in particular intra-industry trade, which I didn't touch on this time, but there are a lot of opportunities around intra-industry trade in Africa. I know we continue to shy away from having this conversation, but we have seen that intra-African trade in itself can also generate value. I mean, Germany and France, they're right next to each other, and they are both in the auto industry, and there is intra-industry trade happening in that regard. So if we're to use the European Union as a benchmark, it is evident that the operationalization and trading of the Afcfta will be a decades-long process that will occur in phases, and it is a journey that we must all be willing to participate in and not give up in, because the danger is that when things really start to hit hiccups, that there will be inertia again, and we will go back to the 1991 Abuja Treaty phase where there's nothing happening. So we must continue to ensure that there is activity. I particularly liked it when Ghana showed when they received their first consignment that was going to be handled under the Afcfta. And I'd like to see more countries doing that, just to show that there really is activity ongoing in that space. So as I close, like I began, I would like to leave you with a quote from Kwame Nkrumah, again from that 1963 speech. I think it is just so relevant. It is also a little funny that we are now in 2021 talking about aspirations from 1963. In any case, here is the closing quote. The task cannot be attached in the tempo of any other age than our own. To fall behind the unprecedented momentum of actions and events in our time will be to court failure and our own undoing. Thank you very much for listening in, and I look forward to responding to your questions. Prof.
Thank you so much for such an illuminating talk, full of insights. Just really thank you for the level of detail, but explained with great clarity, and also just reflecting on things that have not been on the public domain around the texture and the detail of the negotiations in the Afcfta. You've made a number of critical comments on the role of women in business opportunities in ways that do not pigeonhole them, as it were, to create mini kitchens on the margins of big business, where we say, these are places for women, microcredits, and so on. And you started off with a history of integration, putting fires on the dreams that the continent had at the end of colonialism, and why it's important to keep those dreams alive. You also covered elements related to the vaccines, and I'm going to pose some questions on some of these issues. And the most important questions around the Africa's digital futures. And I'm very happy that you mentioned traditional knowledge. Kind of confirms some of the thinking I've been developing in my work, to looking at the relationship between technology and Africa's indigenous knowledge systems, because modernity for many means turning your back away from traditional knowledge, and we see that in languages. I mean, there's a subtle sublimination of indigenous languages in schools, in public discourse, and also, I mean, we participate in it by applauding our kids when they speak English very well. And culture and traditional knowledge systems are also tied to language. You gave a very positive narrative on Africa's future. And I really think that you've given us quite a lot to chew on. The first question I'm going to ask you, and some of these questions have been taken from the chat platform. The first is with respect to tariffs. Tariffs are a source of fiscal revenue for many countries, for small countries especially. And sometimes people have an unrealistic view that liberalization, trade liberalization in the continent could move at a faster pace. And are there any thoughts on strategies to create a development fund that compensates for revenue losses for small countries? I mean, one of the challenges that we've had in SACU, in the common revenue pool, is around the sense that some countries feel that they're contributing more than they're taking out, and subsidizing countries with high income per capita. There are a lot of politics around SACU, and also the resentment that South Africa dominates the sorry.
You're giving me
yeah. So I mean, there are all these politics, and I'm as optimistic as you are that we can get it right in the continent. The second one is around the. I mean, I sit in some of the government structures, and I hear increasingly a lot of talk around localization. Everyone wants to localize supply chains. South Africa wants to localize certain products that it imports, and doing so could disadvantage some of the African countries. Everyone is going, through this phase of relocation of supply chains, and I just wonder if we are thinking this through. And I'm, with the Afcfta, perhaps we have an opportunity to build the continental value chains. Maybe you can reflect on that as well. I will come back to some of the questions related to digital transformation in the continent. And perhaps finally on this round, someone raised a question around the ban on certain types of imports. And they cited your country, unfortunately. I think it's import ban on horticulture and fertile eggs. And I'm sure South Africa has lots of bans or safeguard measures that could affect other African countries. So it's not just one country. I think all countries are misbehaving at times.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Yes, Prof. I think we can all just agree that the project of market unification is going to be really hard. And it is one of the reasons why the negotiations were so extensive and so lengthy. And I mean, I wish I could say that the negotiations have finished. They haven't. The negotiations just really never come to an end, because as and when an economic development happens, as like right now a crisis happens, obviously people, countries start to think more about how do they protect their industries better, how do they ensure that they are citizens. Again, let's not forget that the people that are negotiating here are politicians, and they're all looking at their own mandates at the end of the day. So there is a lot of politics that goes into it, okay, now there are riots in some other province because I have opened up for this particular product. So all of those things get taken into consideration. And some countries, there was a question earlier, why is it some countries have ratified and others haven't? Because some are still going through a process of consulting with the stakeholders to ensure that the sectors that they intend on liberalizing are the ones that we can all agree on. But if we just rope in the ban on, so safeguard measures that are being used by a lot of countries and link it to what I just said, you find that it's really a reactionary model to what appears to be a flood of foreign products into the market that overpower domestic produce. And I do not think that this will ever stop. Even in the most developed markets, there are still safeguard measures that are put into place. And safeguard measures that we will continue to see will not be only for African countries against each other, but will be as well to the rest of the world. So the only thing that we can really say here is countries must desist from protectionist policies and must, where possible, see how best to support the domestic players, how to boost the domestic players in order for them to compete much better with the foreign players. And that can be done in the form of providing, I don't want to say subsidies because that is such a contested issue, but by providing technical support in how they do business, preparing the SPSs, so providing for the standards and ensuring that the safeguards are in place and so forth. And when it comes to, again, it's the same with localization. I was saying you're giving me flashbacks because you're giving me flashbacks, and I don't know how much of my previous work I'm allowed to share, but during SACU meetings, you know, there are always issues that come up, particularly on localization and regional value chains. And I see someone brought it up in the comments here, like, how do we start talking about continental market when we are failing to talk about a regional market? And that continues to be some of the issues that I had, or engagements that happen, negotiations that continuously happen at ministerial and at summits. And what I can tell you is it might not seem to be a sweeping reform for regionalization, but if you start to look closely at individual industries, you will see the convergence happening in regional industry development, because there are some of agreements that happen as and when time goes. It takes so much time because, again, the vested interests, the political mandates that are there, but what has been submitted at the Afcfta, you will find that it's something that has already been agreed at those regional blocks, and it is being submitted as a region. I'll give you an example. When we were negotiating both for the Afcfta and for the tripartite free trade area, we had to negotiate as SACU with the EAC and see what it is, the concessions we were willing to give one another, and some of those then we would also pass them on to the Afcfta. So it would appear as a tick, like, okay, so SACU and EAC have agreed on these matters. Now they can sort of apply to other regions and so forth. A little bit of what happens in the background. And then the most contested issue is obviously tariffs and the impact on government revenues. It's hot. it's not only for tariff liberalization, it is also for digital trading, for e-commerce, because how do you then, the issue is, how do you then add customs to such products? How do you know their origin when the rules of origin on e-platforms, they're not so clear and so forth. So, just to give an example of why this is a contested issue, some countries in Africa get over 70% of their government revenues from customs revenues. So you can imagine that it is not easy at all for some governments to be negotiating on tariff liberalization and them losing out on customs revenue, which is why it's so important that we then talk about more broadly on trade, on how we share wealth generated from liberal trade, how we ensure that there will be intra-industry trade, that there will be the development of regional value chains. When we protect one sector, and I'll give this sector, I don't know if I'm allowed to, but it is the knowledge that I have. I'll give an example with that we protect the auto sector in South Africa. Now, my thinking is, if we protect a sector as in South Africa, then parts of that sector, so along the value and the supply chain of that sector, there should be some distribution to the rest of the region that is helping to protect them, because we have all agreed that we will slap on tariffs on cars that are imported from outside the union, and they should be more expensive than those that are made in the union. And so if we're going to do that, then the brake pads should be made in Namibia, the spark plugs should be made in Eswatini, the tires or whatever should be made in Botswana. But you get the point that we should liberalize even the supply chain, so that we all benefit from the wealth generated from liberalizing trade or from protecting trade. Prof? Let me see.
Thanks, Ms. Kenewendo. A lot of questions on the chat box. We will take two directly, and then I'll ask you questions that you could answer when you close. One of the question is the alignment of Botswana and Namibia with oil and gas industry at a time when the rest of the world is mitigating climate change, and also the continued loss of biodiversity. They would like your view on this. There's a question about the future of ecotourism in Africa and the role of women in the sector. There is a question on, others are very complimentary, that the Afcfta is giving hope for Africa's industrial capacity. And also just to also emphasize, the points you made around the liberalization of value chains in the continent. I think we've not been creative enough to do that, and my view is that it's because of the vested import competing sectors in South Africa, and also the closed nature of the auto sector in South Africa, absorbing a large part of government subsidies. I think 2/3 of government subsidies go to that sector, and it's overlaid with all manner of rebates, and in ways, of course, that hinder the development of the auto supply chains in the rest of the continent. We were sadly a country that destroyed your auto industry around 2000.
And we can certainly have a debate on that, on would it be impossible to grow the supply chains outside of South Africa into Botswana, Eswatini, Namibia, into the SACU countries? Because I think it is not impossible, because what matters is the productivity and the timely delivery to the factory and the cost associated with that. And if countries, if governments, say Botswana, is willing to give some of the concessions, incentives, put them in place to support, say, the, what was it, $10 million Mercedes-Benz plant that was set up in Port Elizabeth, then we should be able to start those negotiations at national level and not just with the companies. Because the minute you go to the companies, I mean, they are also talking about, how already vested with whatever the government are and how they could be litigations amongst other things. Anyway, we digress. But what I want to say is that I believe it's possible when if we choose to work together on regional industrial development.
Just one last set of questions, and then you could close with those. It's an area that is also close to my heart, which is digital transformation in the continent. The importance of investing in technology. Some of the sessions that we've had with venture capitalists, and also just looking at what's happening around the world. One of the things that they raise, especially in countries like South Africa and other countries in the continent, is the ecosystem challenges related to the role of government through enabling policies, the incentives to incentivize venture capital, as well as the right amount of digital skills. I mean, on the policy front, as you'd be aware, we caught up in the spectrum release tangle between the industry and government, and the industry is taking government to court. We talked about spectrum over a decade ago. It's still not yet been released, and that hobbles entrepreneurial spirit. If one looks at the role of connectivity and broadband spectrum in promoting tech entrepreneurship, as well as the overall ecosystem for small and medium enterprises. What can governments do? Also learning from the examples in your country and what you've seen in the continent and elsewhere around the world. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. So I wanted to start off by saying on that ecosystem point, and I know this is one question that people ask a lot, like how will we compete? At this point, really, the competition would be based on how reformist a government is, how they ensure the ease of doing business, the ease and protection of investments, and not just foreign investments, but domestic investments. And this is where also the protocol on investment is so important, because we need to, on a global scale, talk about how we are going to protect investments and safeguard investments in the continent, and ensure that the capital flight that we're seeing, even Africans going to some islands, doesn't happen, that capital comes back and becomes in our continent for the infrastructure needs that we have. I mean, we know that running on a deficit of financing infrastructure, and we have been warned that if we do not invest enough on infrastructure, that Africa risks falling into another economic recession. So we really need to find ways creatively of fixing and reforming the ecosystem that encourages doing business in our countries, and that encourage and stimulates investments, and sees the capital flight that happened, come back to be invested in the continent. Now, when it comes to digital and Afri-Tech, there is also a concern on the that we do not have enough resources that support African governments to know more on policing Afri-Tech and the digital spaces. I mean, even if we look at international finance, it said, I don't have the latest figure, but I think it was something like 4% of all multilateral financing that's available. Only 4% goes towards ICT, and 1% of that 1% goes towards policy making of ICT industries. So that is very dismal and needs to be changed, because when we work, as you know, when we work on the regulatory space and when we start to change our mindset in a particular sector, then things really start to move and something around also move. There was a question on climate change and continued loss of biodiversity. I didn't really capture it well, but what I can say is there has been a push for the Afcfta to take into account climate change and the fact that a lot of African countries will be affected by climate change, and we need to start working now on adaptation strategies in trading and ensure that they are greener and much earth-friendly ways of us trading.
So thanks, Ms. Kenewendo. That gets us to the end of the discussion. I just want to say that this has been the most attended lecture since we started in April 2020. At the peak, we had 600 attendees for 30 on the live Facebook and about 197 on Zoom. So this is the peak of our attendance ever. So we really want to thank you for making time to come and engage with our audience. Really appreciate the time you took to prepare and acknowledge that you've had to shelve other things, and also it eats into your family time. So we don't take that for granted, and we really hope that we can have you again on another theme that is key to Africa's future. So please accept our expressions of gratitude. It's been really, really incredibly valuable. I saw some of the comments on chat. With those words, I would like to close the public lecture, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you, everybody, once again for honoring me with your time. Till next time. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.